You're listening to the Good News Podcast with Jamie Holtum, brought to you by NBUC.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Good News Podcast with Jamie Holtum. My name is Matt. I'm the producer for the podcast. Jamie's away this week, so I figured I would take the time to jump on and introduce myself and let everybody know what we've got in store this week. So this week we have Bruce Marshall, who is an actor, a voice actor, a broadcaster, a writer. He was even a firefighter at one point, but you probably know him best from CHUM FM. Jamie and Bruce get into how Bruce got his start in radio, some of the experiences he's had along the way. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Welcome, everybody, to the Good News Podcast. So glad that you could join us today. And as always, we have a very special guest today. This is Bruce Marshall. Bruce has become a good friend, a faithful participant at NBUC. And I think as we get to hear a bit about Bruce's story, I know when I first met Bruce, I was like, how is all of this in one person? Bruce has so much, a man of many talents and experiences, and a guy who really loves our city and is working hard to be a blessing within it. So, Bruce, thanks again for joining us on the Good News Podcast today. And I just think a fun place to start would be to get to know you a little bit and a little bit of some of the experiences you've had, including working for many years at CHUM, which what an incredible experience that was. So, yeah, I'd love to just hear a bit on some of your past experiences that got you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, when I was young, I had a passion for the emergency services, and I thought at one point that I wanted to be a police officer, but I was also interested in the media, and radio had got my attention, and then I ended up calling some of the radio stations, and a lot of the hosts on air were very gracious with their time. And one thing led to another, and I ended up at 17 years of age, my first full-time job, working as a master control operator at 1050 CHUM, an era when guys like Jay Nelson were around, and Terry Steele and John Major, and the icons of the CHUM name, who were my friends and mentors. I also had a sort of concurrent career in the Canadian Forces Reserves. That went on for a few years. And then eventually I worked through a number of different markets in radio and ended up in Hamilton, Ontario, where I became a member of the Stony Creek Volunteer Fire Department just outside of Hamilton, and quite enjoyed that, and thought, she said, maybe I'd like to do that. And so I applied to the City of Vaughan Fire Department. They were expanding in 1980, and I was hired as a firefighter in Vaughan in 1980, and then I happened to be visiting an old friend of mine from my radio days, who had now made it to CHUM, and he said one day, he said, "Do you ever miss radio?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I do," but I said, if I worked in radio again, I'd want to work at a place like this. And CHUM doesn't hire anybody part-time. Well, 6 weeks later, I was working at CHUM as their first freelancer. And that went on for 20 years between 1050 CHUM and CHUM FM.
That's amazing. Hey, what are some of the experiences that you remember working at CHUM? I know, I saw some of the people that you got to interview and be connected with. What are some that stand out for you as you think back to those days, Bruce?
Well,
and why? Yeah.
Here's the thing that I know you're going to enjoy. You hear stories about celebrities and that they were this or that. You know what I found? And I interviewed hundreds of them. Most of them are really nice people.
Yeah.
They appreciate that I'm living the life, man. I am living my dreams. And, I should be appreciative for that. So if I have to go and do interviews at radio stations and, talk to jokers like Bruce Marshall, well, then, that's part of the gig. And, I always found that there were a few exceptions that, I won't talk about. But, I'll tell you one. Okay. Faith Hill. I interviewed Faith Hill backstage at one of her concerts. And I actually ended up introducing that concert at I forget whether it was the ACC at the time or Rogers Center, but anyway, one of those. And so the interview backstage, and she comes bustling in. I can tell that she's annoyed, and she's got sick kids. She's just, the two kids are on the road with them, and the kids are sick. And she's got to deliver this concert, and she's got to see this joker, Bruce Marshall from CHUM FM. And, oh, geez, I want to get that over with as quickly as I possibly can. And she did, and those are the kind of situations, the real human situations that people go through when they're faith ill. But, you got to cut them a little bit of slack too. So,
yeah. Like you said, everybody's human, and we all live in skin, and we have similar stresses and similar challenges and similar joys, and it's about the people we get to share our life with. I got to ask you, Paul McCartney was one on your list there. What was it like to interview Paul McCartney and spend some time with him?
Paul was like a scrum, a press conference.
Yeah.
And he was late for the press conference. At one point, his manager got up and he says, "Well, as you'll see when you attend the show this evening, you have all got tickets, haven't you?" And half of us looked at him and said, "No, we don't." "You're here to interview Paul McCartney and you haven't got tickets." And he called somebody in from the record company. We all ended up staying. But I only had the opportunity at that point to ask him the one question, and it was the question didn't involve much, but his response to me was the thing that blew me away. And when you're in a press conference like that, you announce who you are and what media outlet you're from. So I said, "Hi, Paul, Bruce Marshall from CHUM," and he looked at me and he said, "Ooh, CHUM." He remembered CHUM. Wow. From all those days, because the CHUM was where the Beatles broke in North America, and then they spilled over the border into the US. But Their North American career happened first on stations like 1050 CHUM.
Yeah. That's cool. Cool. I had no idea.
Yeah. But other interesting interviews like that, Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman, both at separate times. You consider that their hit "American Woman" was the first Canadian hit to go #1 on the international charts. As Burton Cummings is fond of saying today, in 1970, the Guess Who were bigger than the Beatles, and they were. They were one of the biggest acts in the world. And to interview somebody who has had that part in Canadian history was really special.
Yeah. It's amazing, eh? I think when we're sharing the Good News podcast, I think people are always listening for good news, what's interesting, but also how does this relate to my own life? And I think we all probably, whatever age and stage we're at, we get to a point along the way where we're like, wow, it's kind of cool that I got here. Never saw this coming, and it sounds like, like you didn't wake up or grow up thinking I'm going to be a work for CHUM and meet all these people, and and I love the humble way that you share it, Bruce. Really, really do. The other big piece of your past has been around firefighting, and as you know, and I think many know, I'm honored to be the chaplain with the Brampton Fire Department and get to meet amazing women and men who really do give of themselves to help others. It's quite a culture. It's a kind of like we talk about around the church. It really is a family. Brothers and sisters, and just maybe a little bit on your experience around the firefighting world, about just the depth of connection and life that you share, and why people become firefighters, and maybe even more personally, why you chose to enter into that field and that profession.
I think there's in some people in the emergency services, particularly paramedics and firefighters. There are some who are carers to a fault, and they end up harming themselves. I mean, I went out of the fire service after almost 20 years, having gone to one too many terrible, fatal accidents, and I just could not do it anymore. But I think it's after 9/11, everybody wanted to be a firefighter.
Yeah.
It was a popular profession before then. And then after 9/11, everybody wanted to be, one of those guys. It's on the one hand, I know people look at what firefighters do and they marvel at it. On the other hand, it's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I do not miss going to fatal calls.
Yeah.
But I see video of a really humping house fire now, and I think, oh, geez, I'd love to get in there and tangle with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
that never. I don't think that ever leaves you. But yeah, I mean, the culture of the fire service that they spend on average 42 hours a week giving to the community as part of their job, and then
Yeah.
most of those guys, or a lot of them anyway, are involved in charity things. I mean, at one point I was the Ontario firefighter chairman for muscular dystrophy in 1990 and 91. That was a full-time job in and of itself, in addition to my fire department job, because I toured the province for that. And then we had conferences, national conferences that we would end up going to. And I served various different positions. I was also on the telethon production committee. Firefighters, as you may know, are big supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, have been over the years.
Yeah.
So, I arrived on the scene as this firefighter with a broadcasting background, and they do this telethon thing. Hey, let's put this guy on the air and make him our performing monkey in a fire department uniform. So that's what happened. And, I ended up doing things like going to Las Vegas to meet Jerry Lewis.
Wow. That's cool. Yeah. They would have thought they'd struck gold for sure, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that host conference, I've shown you the photograph of Jerry Lewis. That was a host conference of all of the hosts from all over North America. And Jerry at that time was teaching in the master's film program at UCLA. So, he was a guy to get in front of to get some knowledge about communicating using film or visual images, even if it was just a weekend. But he had no respect for all these anchor men and, hosts of Bowling for Dollars from TV stations all across America. But I was there in my uniform, and I was the only guy there. And he had a lot of respect for me. It was great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And this was the other thing. We hung out with Las Vegas firefighters when we did that too. And, you wonder about the untold stories. And apparently Jerry Lewis would drop by a Vegas fire station for a coffee.
Really?
Just to hang out with the boys.
Yeah.
Jerry Lewis.
You know what? That's so cool. Yeah. No cameras, no microphones, just being a real guy supporting people in an important profession. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Hey, I want to jump into Brampton and just because that's we talk about good news and things happen around Brampton, and there's so much that you've been a part of and are now as well, Bruce. Just one more question on your past. This is so interesting. Before we do,
okay,
you've speaking about communications and broadcasting, you've also been teaching others how to do that, and love to hear a bit about that, because I think when it comes to talking in front of people. For some people like yourself, I see it as potentially being quite natural, but I also suspect that the craft that you've worked at, and for you to be able to actually teach others how to do it and break it down, what are some things that you've taught in the past that you've tried? Because some people may listen to this and they may be in a new job where they need to communicate a little bit, and maybe just because we're talking to you today, it's something you've done so much of, both communicating but also teaching people how to do it. What are some tips, some things you've learned along the way, some things that you've tried to share with others as you've done some of that work with people?
Well, this may hit a chord with you as well because of your sport background and coaching and that sort of thing. And that's how I approached that job. That job, I was to coach students through their first on-air experiences on the student radio station. And as you would probably well know from sports, you get a bunch of kids together, and there's a couple that are just stars. I mean, those two are, you hardly even need to say anything to them, but there's some other kids who really need some help in their technique and this and that and the other thing. And it's the same sort of thing with people coming into broadcasting school. There are some who never have any idea that they're ever going to be on the air. They're going to work in the sales department or production or, some other department within the radio station, but they have to do this on-air experience. For those guys, you just try and make it as painless as possible, and find victories. I can remember kids like, what you would do in this context is you would sit down and you would listen to individual breaks that they do on the radio station. So from the time they start talking until the time they stop talking, and the information that they convey in that little piece of data, let's say. And sometimes you'd listen to that and think, what good can I find in this? Hey, you know what? I really appreciate the way you said the call letters with such conviction there. That was fantastic. Now let's build on the rest of this stuff.
Yeah.
And, there are a few people around who were my students who have good jobs in broadcasting these days. So, some of it must have stuck.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. Hey, let's talk about Brampton. And before we get into some of the things that you have been doing here in Brampton, past and present, what is it that you love about our city? Because I know, it's okay to be real. We got challenges like any other city as well, but Brampton's quite a unique city. And this is the Good News podcast. So we always want to kind of talk about some good news happening around our city. So just a great place to start as we slide into this, I think, Bruce, is what do you love about this city? What's unique about Brampton from your perspective?
I think the biggest thing is the opportunity that we have right now. When did you land in Brampton?
Yeah, so it would have been 97, 98.
Okay. I can remember coming to Brampton. In fact, I was at CHIC radio, which was in Brampton a couple of times over. CFNY was also famously in a house on Ellen Street in Brampton in their very early days. So I remember coming to Brampton in the late 70s and early 80s when it was this sleepy little farm town. I think our population was something like 40,000 in 1976 or something like that. And now we're at 600,000, heading to 750. We're the 9th largest city in the country, 4th largest city in Ontario, growing in leaps and bounds. We need a lot more commercial tax base, so that's something that we need to be working on. There's a sweet spot ratio of residential taxes to commercial taxes that most municipalities have, and Brampton is way off on our commercial taxes because we've built these fields of nothing but houses and no place for anybody to work. So that's one of the things that we need to work on. But I arrived here like so many other people did. I was born and raised in Toronto. My family goes back a long, long way in Toronto. On my dad's side, we go back 6 generations. So I thought of myself as a Toronto guy who sort of slept in Brampton. But it became my hometown the longer I lived here. And, I wanted to have an influence on things that were happening. So, I've gotten involved in a number of different issues that are important to me. The issue of homelessness and vulnerable people, not having proper support is one of those issues. Youth engagement is another. We have problems with, let's say, with youth behavior right now. And we have a lot of people talking about how we need to get tough and lock people up. But I don't think that's the solution. That has not been the solution on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have these problems because we've let programs go. We've gutted our social programs. And so we've left this to the police to use. So I think we need to reprioritize these things. And as we record this, it's March 26th, the morning of March 26th. Just a couple of days ago, the provincial government came down with a budget, which made a lot of promises for Brampton with respect to a hospital. But there wasn't any line items in the budget. There was, $1.5 million to do a study to think about what we're going to do in Brampton. Apparently at 1:00 this afternoon, the Premier is going to be making a further announcement on that. But this is something that, too, that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. According to Mayor Brown, in January of last year, Brampton was down over 800 beds. Last January, we were down 800 beds in terms of the average that everyone else in Ontario gets. So we have a lot of catching up to do. And I don't think Band-Aids are going to be the solution. We need some bold action on that. And in terms of of hospitals, I think we should be looking at, everybody talks about something up in the northwest corner of the city, and that seems to make a lot of sense. But the next one would be in the northeast corner of the city, which would not only catch the east side of Brampton, but would catch the west side of Vaughan and Caledon and up and through King, where they have long transport routes to hospital now. So those are some of the things that I keep an eye on and want to see if I can shepherd in the right direction if possible.
Yeah. I mean, I love the gamut of things that you get connected with, Bruce. Like, you've just named two really big things that are, and sometimes in different worlds for many people. You've talked about poverty and poverty reduction, but you also talked about just where the next hospital will go on, and announcements from our government. Those are really big conversations. I want to drill down a little bit on the poverty reduction, because I know you've sat around some committees and teams that have really been looking at why that we have poverty and what we can do about it. And I think you've got into some detail that a lot of people wouldn't know about. And some of the good news for us is just really even being aware of some of these realities and how we can respond together as a community. And then also, if talking about that, you've worked with some people who many wouldn't know. They're not necessarily on the front page of the Guardian, or they're not big social media people. But when I think about someone like Edna Toth, who you've worked with so closely, I just think part of the Good News podcast story should be sharing the work, the faithful work of people like that, who many wouldn't know. So yeah, just around the poverty work that you've done, what you've been learning, how we can be a part of it. But let's lift up someone like Edna today and tell us a bit about the good work, the great work, the faithful work that she's been doing for so many years.
Yeah. And hey, I'll look right down the camera right now and I'll say, when we get finished this, Google Edna Toth and you will discover an amazing woman, but not until we're finished this thing. Okay? Edna is, she just turned 90. She is this driving force in services for homeless people and poverty reduction. A little unassuming English lady with a bit of a timorous English accent, but she's a lion. She is just a lion. I was in a meeting with her just yesterday, actually, while she was roaring about things.
So Bruce, not to interrupt you, but when people wonder what was Mother Teresa like, and it's hard to compare anybody to Mother Teresa, but Edna Toth's pretty darn close, if you ask me. That's what I hear. Gentle, small, that's what you see. But wow, fiery as far as around a cause, man, you do not want to get on board or get out of the way, kind of thing. Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other committee I sit on is the Master Regional Committee, the Peel Poverty Reduction Strategy Committee. And that is probably something like 150 organizations in Peel Region that do something for people who are homeless or living in poverty. Right. And so one of the things we're trying to do is systemize things. So there's a subcommittee I sit on right now, for example. We're looking at what services are available for people who can't afford a lot of cell phone service. For cell phone service, can we provide these people with cell phone service of some kind? And apparently there are programs out there. Some of them are sponsored by the carriers. Some of them are sponsored by various organizations. But the fact of the matter is, if you're a homeless person, if you're a person who's living, let's say at rock bottom, and you want to move up, you want to get a job. You've been in the library and you've applied for some jobs. What number do you put down so that they can get in touch with you to interview you for the job if you haven't got a phone? To apply for that job, we know a lot of homeless and vulnerable people use the libraries. Why shouldn't they, in this time, have internet service at home? It's an essential.
Yeah.
So we're looking at closing the loop on things like that. We discovered, for example, that the school board has been very active in providing students with computers and with internet service so that they can take part in online learning. But we also learned the various stories about teachers going above and beyond the call and it was taking too long to get this student a computer. So I went to Walmart and got one for him.
Nice.
There, that's done. And, with Katrina being a teacher, I'm sure you're hearing stories like that all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Bruce, I love it, man. I love that you're sitting on a committee like that. And, for instance, sit on a committee, it's very important work, but sometimes you just got to do what you just did. I'm just going to go out and get that computer and give it to that kid. Like and then, signed, sealed, and delivered. That one's taken care of, and taking care of the one. And I love that about you, my man. And just really, really want to hold that up as part of what we're talking about here today. My sense is, Bruce, you've always been someone to get involved. You haven't, just as we've talked, as I've seen some of the things that you're involved with, throughout your life and certainly even now, where does that come from? Where does it come from? The sense that you just got to serve, you got to be a part of things. You want to bring help to people. As you think about your life, get any sense of where does that come from for you?
Just an idea that, and maybe the same motivation that brought me to the fire department, that something is wrong and let's make it right. And I'm kind of in a unique position of having 40 years of experience in the media, that if I see something that's wrong and I want to shed a light on it, I have some powerful tools to do that. Whether it's just a post on Facebook or a video that I create or news releases that I send out or whatever, and I've found that you can have an effect in surprising ways. There was something happening at City Council a few years ago that I was not very happy with. There's some money that was being spent that I didn't think should be spent, and I didn't think was being spent in an ethical manner. And so I went to the Integrity Commissioner and asked the commissioner to review that, and she did in fact find wrongdoing in that. So there's an example of you see something wrong. As you know, I ran for city council in 2018, and I was not elected. But even as just a regular citizen, there are ways that you can have an influence, and the Integrity Commissioner is one of those ways. Mm-hmm. So I did that a couple of years ago and shone a light on this expenditure. And at this point, I think I'm pretty proud to say that by the time elections roll around next year in Brampton, I will have saved the city of Brampton $1 million.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
This is where we would all applaud if we were all together. So where you are in your heart, you can applaud that. That's incredible. But again,
before we go on, let me do say that I am not at all opposed to investment in things that are worthwhile.
Sure.
But I believe that this thing was not a worthwhile investment, and that's why I spoke up about it. So I would not want to leave the impression that I'm a tax cut kind of guy, and we've got to cut at every corner. Yeah, it's important that we cut where we can, but it's important that we invest where we can too.
Absolutely.
And homeless people and youth are one of those investments I think we should be getting more involved in.
No, and that's why I love, Bruce, that you're collecting a bigger picture of what's going on in our city and where the resources can maybe be better spent, not spent, but be better spent. And 100% agree. You've used some of the gifts and experience that God has given you to create a communication channel, if you will. Better Brampton, I think is that what you've called it? Yeah.
Well, Bruce Marshall's Brampton Stories of a Great City is the channel that I do my Brampton Now update from.
Okay.
So is the Brampton Now update what you wanted to chat about?
Yeah. Tell us a bit about that. And what I love, Bruce, is, people, hey, as you're listening, as you're watching this today, like that may not be what you're able to do. Because my sense is Bruce is doing that one because he's got a lifetime in media experience. He knows sound and technology and production. And so he loves to communicate. So he's using those gifts that God has given him in a way that honors who he is, who God has made him to be. Yours might be different. So don't think this is what you have to do. However, I'd love for you to hear about this because Bruce is trying to share good news through this channel, through this avenue. Again, you'll find the way that God's calling you to respond where you are with the gifts that God has given you. But this is a cool one, Bruce. I love that you are, again, leveraging what God has given you to communicate good news to a city that we just need to hear more and more of that. Because too often, and that's partly why we started the Good News podcast, too often we just hear the negative things that are happening because those are the things that make the front page of the paper, generally speaking. And fair enough, the media has a job to do. I don't understand everything that happens. All I know is that we hear and see a lot of good news in the work that we do, and we want to lift those things up. And that's what you're doing with this. So yeah, tell us a bit about it. Maybe one of your favorite things that you've been able to lift up through this avenue that you've created.
Well, the purpose of it really was, again, my experience as a broadcaster.
Yeah.
I know broadcasting fairly deep and wide. How to put a show together, how to make something appeal to an audience, and how to serve a need. And what was the need here in Brampton? Well, we were at the beginning of the pandemic. Brampton does not have a TV station nor a radio station. As we discussed earlier, we're the ninth largest city in the country, close to 700,000 people. We're probably the largest city in all of the country that has no TV or radio station that provides information directly to that city. So we had a situation with the crisis with the pandemic.
Yeah.
I had skills as a broadcaster on the one hand, and on the fire department, I was also involved in hazardous materials. So this pandemic thing, it's a great big hazardous materials incident. And, when this thing started to go down, they started talking my language. In fact, I spent 3 hours. I have an interview that I recorded a year ago with the chief emergency planner for the city of Brampton, who is a world-renowned guy in his field. And he talked about what they had put together. So, we had information that was specific for Brampton. We had the city of Brampton doing their press conference every week. But that was a rambling 30 to 45 minute thing. And, there was all kinds of information in there that, maybe people didn't want to sit through. So I figured if I could put together something that was, say, 7 to 15 minutes or something like that, that gives them, this is what is important to Brampton. This is the news that's important to Brampton. Then that would serve an essential need for a Brampton audience. And as it has gone on, I've brought in more stories. One of the stories I talked about not long ago was the second fire at Art Glen.
Yeah.
And the context of that, and the first fire at Art Glen. And Art Glen, of course, to anybody in the North Bramley United Church community, they know that the Journey Neighborhood Center is in there. It's a vulnerable neighborhood that needs some help. And there was a tragic fire there a number of years ago as well. And this is, the second instance of that. In fact, the guy who shot those visuals, who made them available to me, he wasn't aware of the history of Art Glen. So, that regeneration was one of the things that I tried to shine a spotlight on when they were starting up with the food bank. For anybody who doesn't know that story, I'm sure you know it well, but the story is that there was another church in Brampton that did a little food bank. They were all seniors, so they were all vulnerable. So they were having to shut down their food bank program. And in addition to all of the stuff that Ted Brown and all of his cast of characters does at Regeneration, they took on the food bank for Brampton. So, and put it in their new thrift store facility. And now we have food bank facilities that, well, I think Ted Brown's warehouse probably rivals Loblaws in some ways.
Oh, exactly. Serving hundreds of people every week.
Yeah. And there wasn't any, oh, geez, we've already got enough to do. No, Ted was, come on, let's get another wheelbarrow of this stuff and put it where it needs to go.
Yeah, exactly. We've had Ted on the Good News podcast. We'll have him again because he's just a great leader in our city and a lot. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Bruce. you mentioned about North Brampton United Church, and as I introduced you, it's been so great to have you connect in with the faith community there, and just love what's happening. We're talking about creating a better Brampton. That so aligns with, that's been the vision that God has blessed our church with for a long time. Imagine God building better lives, better families, a better Brampton and beyond. We do, and just as you've entered into the NBUC community, the church life. I love a phrase that we've used as a family on a mission.
Yeah.
How do you see the role of the church in helping to create a better city? Both what you've seen happening and maybe what could still happen as we move forward together.
Well, one of the things I really appreciate about North Bramalea United, and let me back up a little further. The reason I came to North Bramalea, there were two reasons I came to North Bramalea United: the reputation and the fact that it was a United Church, and that was my family's tradition. My grandparents were involved in Willowdale United Church, which has a very, very long history in what is now Toronto, something like 1816. They had their first building there. And in the early 50s, they built a new building, and my grandfather was involved in the construction committee of that. So, on my grandfather's side, my father's father was very involved in the United Church. And I was looking for a place to be involved, and I just kept hearing about all this stuff that North Bramalea was doing. And, if that's what Christ is all about, then that's what these guys are doing. I find that what North Bramalea does as a congregation is lives Christ's message.
Yeah.
Really, I'm irked, I tell you, by some of the people who are online and refer to themselves as Christians, and they're screaming about how they need to get back in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And how at North Bramalea United, one of these days we'll be back in the church, but God is calling us to do something a little different right now. So let's do that. And where so many people or so many faith institutions don't seem to live up to even the minimum that Christ would call them to do, everybody seems to go overboard at North Bramalea. And it's more than just going to church on Sunday. It's being involved in all of these things that make Brampton a better place.
Yeah. No, well put. Thanks, Bruce. And yeah, we want to respect and not judge others for what they choose to do. But for us, certainly, man, it's been so clear from the very beginning of COVID that and Andy Stanley, I thought he put it really well. He said, the church is meant to be a blessing to the world. And so the last thing we want to do is spread COVID. We want to help stop it. And then God has blessed us with a great team to be able to go online and do things like we're doing here today. And it's so great to have you a part of it. And we are so committed to serving the community. And the thing is, what we've discovered along the way, and this is the gospel. Like, gospel literally means good news. The good news is when we give ourselves to that, that's what God did. God came in Jesus, gave himself to the world. When we live like that, in whatever way it might be, going out and buying a computer for a kid that needs one, offering a smile to somebody who's your cashier because you just never know what kind of day they've had before they got there, whatever it might be, we get blessed in the process. And that's the gospel. That's the good news. And so, I think this is a great place for us to end today, but want to give you a shot for, one last word. But I'm motivated, I'm encouraged, I'm inspired by the way we're ending here, just to go live this out. And as we do, God is smiling, and we're blessed along the way, and we get to bless a few people as we go about it.
Yeah. To close, just I really appreciate what our community has done. My girlfriend Christina is on the affirming committee.
Yeah.
And one of the things they talked about was the idea of welcoming people. And then they thought, no, wait a minute, that word welcoming sort of that has a sort of, we're in control and we can decide who we have. And that's not the ethic at North Bramalea United. The ethic is that you're a part of it. Just walk in and you are one of us. And, that's a powerful community institution.
Yeah, no, that's I love it. I love it. And isn't that what God did in Jesus? I'm going to come and be one of you, take on human flesh, and invites us to do the same. And whenever we do that, whenever that happens, it's good. It's good news. So
it's good news.
Thanks, Bruce, man. Love you guys so much. And thanks for being a part of the Good News podcast today. So much. So good to have this conversation with you. I could see more coming down the pipe. And thanks everybody else for joining us today on the Good News podcast. God bless you and be with you. And until next time, look forward to joining you. Go and be a spreader of good news. Hopefully you've been inspired today as we've heard Bruce's story. And there's lots of opportunities for all of us in whatever ways God's calling us. And go get them. And thanks again for joining us today on the Good News podcast. Thanks, Bruce, so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Good News podcast with Jamie Holtum. If you liked what you heard today, please share it with a friend who may benefit from today's conversation. And if you want to hear more, be sure to subscribe to this show and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. Thanks again. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and we'll see you next time.